You've probably heard America has a 90-day food supply, enough reserves to ride out any crisis. It's reassuring. It's also completely false. The United States has no strategic food reserve. None. We eliminated it in 1996. Your grocery store operates on 2 to 3 days of perishable inventory. Beef in cold storage just hit a 23-year low. And here's the part that should concern you. 4 companies, JBS, Tyson, Cargill, and National Beef, control 85% of all beef processing in America. 19 plants process 80% of every cow in this country. One ransomware attack in 2021 shut down 20% of national meat production. Overnight, gone. Rome built the same kind of system. Concentrated, efficient, fragile. So did the Soviets. Every single one collapsed, and millions died. But it gets worse. The 90-day supply isn't just wrong, it's dangerously wrong. It makes people think there's a buffer. There isn't. We used to have reserves. The Carter administration created a grain reserve in 1977. Congress eliminated it in 1996. The replacement holds only cash, reserved for international aid. Not domestic emergencies, not you. International aid. China maintains strategic grain reserves exceeding 700 million tons. Over a year of food for 1.4 billion people. America's strategic reserve for 330 million people? 0. China has a year of food stored. We have whatever's on the truck, and that's not even the structural problem. It's not just that we have no buffer. It's who controls the flow. This is where the pattern starts. At its peak, Rome was the largest city the world had ever seen. 1 million people. The streets were crowded with merchants, soldiers, senators. The Colosseum held 50,000 spectators for the games. Aqueducts carried fresh water from the hills. Grain ships arrived daily from across the Mediterranean. The empire had stood for centuries, and Romans assumed it would stand for centuries more. They fed this city through the Annona, a state logistics system that shipped grain from Egypt and North Africa. 200,000 tons a year. It worked brilliantly. For centuries. Until it didn't. The system had one fatal flaw: geographic concentration. Egypt and North Africa supplied everything. The historian Josephus wrote that Africa fed Rome for 8 months of the year. Egypt covered the other 4. 2 sources. 1 city, 1 million mouths. The Romans knew the vulnerability. Augustus made Egypt his personal property. Anyone who controlled Egypt could starve Rome. Remember this date, October 19th, 439 AD. Vandal king Gaiseric captured Carthage. Through deception, Rome's primary grain supplier, gone, overnight, not conquered through a long siege, taken in a single day. The consequences cascaded for decades. Rome lost the grain, but they also lost the tax revenues that financed the armies. Landowners fled North Africa. The Vandals used food as leverage for the next century. One city, held hostage by grain. By the 6th century, Rome's population had collapsed, from 1 million to maybe 30,000. The forums fell silent. The aqueducts crumbled. The greatest city in the world became a village haunted by ruins. Not from barbarian invasion, not from military defeat. From food? Sound familiar? Just as Rome concentrated its food security in 2 geographic choke points, America has concentrated its protein supply in 4 corporate choke points. Same structure, same vulnerability, different century. And Rome isn't the only example. The pattern repeated 1,500 years later, with worse results. Stalin centralized Soviet agriculture in the early 1930s. Private farms seized, livestock confiscated, everything flowed through the state. Villages that failed to meet grain quotas were blacklisted, encircled by troops. No food in, no one out, a collective death sentence. This is what centralized control makes possible. At the peak of the Holodomor, 25% of Ukrainian districts were blacklisted, surrounded, starving. The law of 5 stalks permitted execution of anyone, including children, caught taking any produce from collective fields. Children shot for picking up fallen grain. Here's what makes it monstrous. The 1932 harvest was sufficient to feed everyone. The USSR exported 1.7 million tons of grain during the famine, while 28,000 Ukrainians died per day. 22 million tons sat in public granaries while peasants dropped dead in the streets. At the height of the famine, trains loaded with Ukrainian wheat rolled west toward European ports. Peasants too weak to stand watched the grain cars pass. The state had the food, the state chose who ate. 4 million dead, 13% of the population. Some villages lost everyone. Centralization didn't fail to prevent the famine. Centralization caused it. 2 examples, 15 centuries apart. One pattern, concentrate the food supply, and you create a single point of failure. When it fails, millions die. And here's what should keep you awake at night. We've built the same structure. In 1980, the top 4 beef processors controlled 36% of the market. Competitive, distributed, resilient. Today, JBS, Tyson, Cargill, and National Beef Control, 85%. The USDA calls it one of the largest concentration increases in any manufacturing industry ever recorded. 40 years, from distributed to oligopoly. 19 plants process 80% of all cattle. 24 plants process 80% of all hogs. Kansas, Nebraska, Texas, and Colorado handle 3/4 of beef capacity. But here's what nobody's talking about. JBS is Brazilian-owned. National Beef is 82% owned by Marfrig, also Brazilian. Smithfield, the world's largest pork producer, is owned by China's WH Group. Foreign nations have more control over American protein than most Americans realize. The grain supply runs through 4 companies, ADM, Bunge, Cargill, and Louis Dreyfus. They control over half of global grain flows. Cargill alone pulls in $160 billion a year and controls 80% of Gulf port elevator capacity. 4 companies, 19 plants, 0 reserves. We already saw what happens when this breaks. COVID hit meatpacking plants like a bomb. By May 2020, 239 facilities had reported outbreaks. Processing capacity dropped 45%. 59,000 workers infected. At least 269 died. More than 10 million hogs couldn't be processed. Farmers had nowhere to send them. Pigs were gassed, shot, and buried in mass graves across the Midwest. Not because there wasn't demand, because 19 plants couldn't keep up. The concentrated workforce that made processing efficient made it deadly. Then came June 2021. A single ransomware attack shut down every JBS facility in America. Beef, pork, poultry, all offline. 20% of national meat processing capacity, gone overnight. JBS paid $11 million in ransom. One company's IT failure became a national security event because of concentration, and it's still happening. Avian flu has culled over 180 million birds since 2022. The virus jumped to dairy cattle, now in 17 states, over 1,000 herds affected. Ransomware attacks on food and agriculture hit 212 in 2024, up 27% from the year before. And it's not over. This already happened, and we changed nothing. So what happens if multiple choke points fail at once? A coordinated cyber attack on multiple processors isn't science fiction. The vulnerabilities are documented. The attacks are increasing. A worse pandemic would find the same concentrated workforces in the same crowded conditions. The infrastructure hasn't changed. The concentration hasn't changed. Only the threat has. The supply chain is shaped like an hourglass. Millions of farmers on one end, 300 million consumers on the other. And in the middle, a handful of plants. When processing fails, it cascades both directions. Farmers euthanize animals. Consumers face empty shelves. There's no flex in the system. It can only break. Rome's system worked for centuries. Then Carthage fell in a day. The Soviets fed their people until centralization became a weapon. Concentrated systems don't decline gradually. They snap. So what do you do with this information? The people who survived historical food system failures weren't lucky. They were positioned. The reserve the government eliminated. You can keep it yourself. The concentrated supply chain you can't control. Build relationships outside it. Local farms, regional processors, the infrastructure that exists parallel to the big four. Most people have no idea the 90-day supply is a myth. They think there's a buffer. There isn't. You know that now. 4 companies control 85% of your beef. 19 plants process 80% of every cow. There's no strategic reserve. And we've already watched this system fail 3 times in 5 years. The pattern is clear. Rome, the Soviet Union. Concentration works until it doesn't. And when it fails fast. If this showed you something nobody else is covering, subscribe, because there's more to see. The answers aren't hiding in the future. They're written in the past. and I'll show you where to look. Position accordingly.